Hi there, I am Lindsay with Off the Beaten Hook, and this video tutorial is a supplement to my Mt Rainier Pullover crochet sweater pattern. The full pattern is free on my blog, or you can purchase the ad-free printable PDF from my pattern shop or from Ravelry. This video does not cover the pattern row by row, so if you're arriving here before you've gotten a hold of the pattern, feel free to watch it first and then go grab the pattern, or go grab the pattern first and come back here to complete your sweater with me. So I will include the links to all the places you can find the pattern in the description box below. All right, so let's get going on the ribbed collar for this sweater. So the ribbed collar is made using back loop only single crochet. Refer to the written pattern for the number of rows you're going to need to do for your size. But for all sizes, we are going to begin by chaining 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, so this is a little chain, and working through the back bumps of your chain on the way back down, we're going to begin with that second back bump from the hook. So we're skipping that very first chain from the hook. We're going to just do a row of single crochet all the way back down using the back bumps of your chain. You're going to end up with 6 single crochets at the end of this little tiny chain. 5 and 6. All right, so that is your first little rib of your collar. Chain 1 and turn. So now working back down, we're going to be working through the back loops only. So you have 2 loops for each stitch, and rather than working under both of them, we're going to be working through this back loop only of every single row of this collar. So you're going to complete your single crochet. Again, you're going to have 6 going back down, back loop only, through each of those stitches going down. Six. Okay. Got 2 little rows of our collar. Chain 1, turn. It's going to be the exact same thing, back loop only, single crochet in the 6 stitches. And I want to show you as we do our final one here, sometimes since you're chaining at the end of these tiny little rows, it hides that very first stitch. So it's going to be really critical to remember to count your stitches as you go along so you don't forget that one last little stitch that is always so tempted to be hidden under that chain. So your first one, no big deal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then if you're not counting, it can be super easy to be like, oh, I'm gonna turn right here, because it's really easy to miss that 6th one that kind of hides under your chain. So I just wanted to give you that little tip. All right, so based on the size that you are making, refer to the written pattern, and you're going to make these little rows over and over and over again until you reach the size that you need for the sweater that you're making. And it is critical that you make the right number of ribs, because it will affect your first row of the yoke. So you do need to make sure that you have exactly right number of rows for that. So I'm going to get going on this, and I will meet you at the end of this little ribbed collar, and we will join it and get going on the yoke of the sweater. All right, I've made it to the end of my 48 rows, which is the size that I am making, the number of rows that I need for my size. So at the end here, I am going to just chain 1, and I'm going to go ahead and bring the other side against this side, making sure there's no twists in my collar. You certainly don't want a big twist in the middle. Making sure it's flat against each other, just like this. All right, and we are going to seam this together. So going through all 6 stitches for both sides, I'm just going to slip my hook underneath both of those rows, the ends of both of those rows, and make a slip stitch. Make sure you don't do it super tight or it could kind of cinch this up and mess up with the tension. Go ahead and make 6 slip stitches all the way down to join these rows into a circle. All right, and 6. Okay, so now you've got your little collar closed up. Go ahead and put it over your head. Make sure it fits. If you need to size up, you can, but just remember that the rest of your size of your sweater will have to, go along with that. So if you do have to size up, you need to size up for the rest of the pattern as well. The beautiful thing about this pattern, though, is it is highly modifiable because it's just a yoke sweater. You try it on as you go along. So don't fret if you do need to change the size up a little bit. Okay, sorry about that. I'm going to chain 1, and now we're going to start straight away with our first row of the yoke. Okay, so I've got my row of slip stitches here that I did. I want that to be on the inside, so just make sure that you can take off your hook and flip it to the inside here and make sure you've got the right side facing, because the rest of the sweater is going to work with that that method with the right side facing. Okay, so for the yoke, the most beautiful thing about this sweater is we are just going to be working in continuous rounds of half double crochet. We're not going to be joining the rounds and chaining like you do on a lot of patterns. We're just going to keep going and going and going. Now, make sure that you have a bunch of stitch markers on hand. The technique that I use for really keeping track of your stitches and where you need to place your increases as you go around is just critical that you use stitch markers so you don't have to count. You certainly can count, but you're still going to want to mark everywhere that you put your half double crochet increase. Now, you're not going to have to make any increases in round 1. You're just going to do 1 row of half double crochet all the way around. But if you're planning on doing more than just that first row, then it'll be nice to have your stitch markers ready to go for you. All right, so what I am going to do now is I am going to go through and I'm going to place 1 half double crochet at the end of each of the ribs of my collar. Okay, so locating kind of the ends of each of those rows. I almost did a single crochet. Go ahead and create your first half double crochet, and I'm going to mark that one. I always mark the beginning stitch of a round. And then going through every one, so you can have these valleys and these peaks, when you're working with a ribbed collar. So go ahead and just make your way all the way around. Try to pick up 2 loops at the end of each of the rows of your rib. You don't want to just do 1. It can kind of create a kind of ugly gap. So after round 1, you're going to have the same number of stitches that you do ribs in your collar. Right, I have completed the first round of my yoke. So I've placed 1 half double crochet at the end of each of these ribs from my collar. And I did go back and change out the type of stitch marker I used to mark my first stitch, and here is why. From this point on, you are going to be doing a lot of stitch marking if you are using the kind of quick tip method that I use in the pattern, and you are going to need a bunch of stitch markers. And for the very first mark of every row, which you're going to be marking the first stitch of your increase, which is the first stitch of your row from here forward for your yoke, for at least for the first portion of your yoke. And you want that first stitch to always be marked so that you can keep the count of your rows. And for me, it's easier to mark that very first one with a different type of stitch marker so that it's easier for me, like, oh, as I approach that little metal stitch marker, that's the end of my round. And then I use these locking stitch markers to mark the first stitch of each of my increases inside of the rounds, and I will show you what that looks like. So I did go back and I switched it out so that I wouldn't forget to notice that every time I ran around. Okay, so for here through round 8 for the yoke, you're going to be making several increases as you go around. And then from there, it's every other round you will be making increases to increase the size of your yoke. And here is how that is going to work. So for the very first stitch of each of your rounds, and I just keep these stitch markers in, for the very first stitch, you are going to be making a increase, and you're going to be putting a stitch marker in the very first half double crochet of that increase. Okay, so again, you're not going to join with a slip stitch or anything. We're just straight away going into our second round of the yoke. So I'm going to do my half double crochet increase, which is of course 2 half double crochets in that same stitch, which is the first stitch of the round. And I'm going to mark again with my special metal stitch marker the first stitch of that increase. Okay, so it's the first stitch of the increase, and it's also the first stitch of my round. So when I get back around here, I'll know that I'm about to start my next round. Okay, so for round 2 of the yoke, you're going to be doing a half double crochet increase followed by 3 half double crochets. So just 1 half double crochet in each of the next 3 stitches. And then you're going to be doing another half double crochet increase followed by 3 half double crochets, increase, 3 half double crochets all the way around. But what you're going to do is, so I've come to my next half double crochet increase. So what you're going to do at each of those increases, you are going to place a stitch marker in the first stitch of that half double crochet increase. And that is the stitch where when we come around again on our next round, you're also going to be making your increase into that stitch. Then you'll be removing that stitch marker and replacing it into the first stitch of that half double crochet increase. Okay, so we just did a half double crochet increase. Now we're doing 3 half double crochets. 1, 2, 3. Now we are making another increase, so into this next stitch. And then again, for those 2 stitches, we're going to be placing a stitch marker in the first stitch of that half double crochet increase. And when we come back around, we're going to be putting a half double crochet increase into that stitch. All right, so I'm going to continue this all the way around, making the half double crochet increase followed by 3 half double crochets. And then every time I do that half double crochet increase, I'm going to place a stitch marker into the first stitch of that increase. Okay, so I'm going to complete this round quickly, and then I will do the next round with you and show you how that ends up coming together as you work your way around in subsequent rounds. All right, so I will meet you there. Okay, I'm on my last 3 stitches of round 2. And here we are back to the beginning of my round. Okay, so here we're going to do the next round together as well, and then you'll get the hang of how this technique works. So for the first 7 rounds, you won't have to count so much. So here we are. Beginning round 3, we're going to start with a half double crochet increase straight into that very first stitch of the previous round. All right, so 2 half double crochets, and I will mark that very first one with a metal stitch marker or some other kind of other stitch marker. You could even use a little strip of yarn or some other type of stitch marker, just to remember that it is your first stitch of the round. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I don't even have to count. You certainly can, but I'm going to just make my way across with 1 half double crochet in each stitch up until the next stitch marker. And so at this stitch marker, what I'm going to do is take it out, and then I'll make my half double crochet increase there. So 2 half double crochets, and then I will simply use that stitch marker, place it again back into the first of those 2 half double crochets of that increase, and then 1 half double crochet in each stitch until I get to my next stitch marker. And for me, this just makes it so much faster than having to count. You don't even have to pay attention. And here we are at our next one. So I'm taking that out. I'm placing 2 half double crochets in there and putting that back into the first of those 2 half double crochets that I just made, and on and on and on. So your first 7 rounds, you don't even have to count anything. I mean, certainly after every couple, you just, do kind of head count to make sure you've got the right number of stitches in the round. If you don't, then, add one if you need to, or take one out by, eliminating one of the increases. It's no big deal, if you have to just do a little correction like that. You don't need to frog the whole thing to get to the right stitch count if you're only off by a couple. Add another increase somewhere or take one away. All right, so I am going to just continue on in this way for the first 7 rounds. So I will meet you there once I am done with my yoke, and we will cover splitting the yoke for the sleeves and the body portion, and we will move on from there. Do not be alarmed that I have switched to a different hook size. The pattern is written for a size 6mm hook. This is a different yarn than I used when I originally designed the sweater. It responds a lot more dramatically to blocking, and so I needed to size down a hook in order to obtain the gauge. So I know many of your keen eyes will notice that, and I wanted to make sure that I answered that question so you didn't have to take the time to reach out on that one. Just a quick second to note how important it is to do a gauge swatch before you jump into the pattern fully. Do just like a 5x5 gauge swatch of half double crochet, block it, allow it to dry, and then gauge so that you can tell whether or not you are using the right hook size. If you've never done that before and you need help understanding gauge, I have a really detailed tutorial on that one, and I will link to that in the description box below so that you can go over and learn all about how to obtain gauge to make sure that your sweater fits properly. So at this point we have completed our yoke and we are ready to split for our sleeves and the main portion of the body. Yours might look like a little bit different size based on the size that you're making. And here are my stitch markers, all marking the first stitch of each of the rows, which has helped me keep track of the number of rows as I've gone along. All right, so this is how we are going to split for the sleeves. I am going to turn mine upside down to show you this. Here is where I have left off on my last stitch of my final round of the yoke. For ease, I make this be where I'm going to begin with the body portion, which is the next portion of the pattern. So in order to split for my sleeves, for my first sleeve, I'm actually going to begin by counting back from where I left off, because ultimately what's going to happen is this is how it's going to look after you stitch mark for this in general. You're going to pinch this here and create one sleeve, and then you're going to do the same on the opposite side. You're going to do a pinch and stitch mark here, of course counting the proper number of stitches for your sleeve opening. And then this middle portion becomes the body going down the torso of your body. So for me, since we pick up out from the yoke right where we left off to do the body portion, that's why I keep this as the very first stitch of that body portion and make my first sleeve opening this direction. Okay, so what you're going to do is, according to the size of your sweater that you're making, you will begin to count backwards from here for the number of stitches for your sleeve opening, and you will take one stitch marker and you will stitch mark it closed, marking your sleeve opening. So I'm going to do that right now. Okay, so this is my 48th stitch. So again, for the size that I am making, that is going to be part of the sleeve. So I am going to stitch mark those 2 stitches together. So those two, the first stitch and the last stitch there, are included in the stitch count for my first sleeve opening. Okay, so now what I am going to do is I'm going to count my way across to create my opposite side for my other sleeve opening over here, which will be, of course, the same count. So for the middle part of my body, I'm going to begin counting half of the amount that I need for the full amount around that I need for the body. So for the size that I'm making, I need 132 stitches around each round of this body, the torso part. So for my count, I'm going to want 132 divided by 2. I'm going to want 66 stitches from the front and 66 stitches from the back, and that is where those are going to combine. And if my math is right, I will have the correct amount for my other sleeve, which for my size I'm making is 48. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and count that out. And again, I'm doing 66 from the front and 66 from the back and marking that as my body portion. 66 from the front. I'll mark that one. That is going to be included in the portion for my body. And then 66 starting from, this one is marked for my sleeve. So on the back, starting from that next available stitch and counting 66 across that. 66. Okay, so I am going to use this stitch marker and mark that one there. Okay, so now I have split my yoke for my sleeve here, 48 around for the size I'm making, for my body portion here, this big circle, which is 132 stitches around, and then on this side, another sleeve opening, which is 48 stitches, okay? So now the rest of the pattern is very straightforward from here, just a lot of half double crocheting around in continuous rounds. At this point, we do not increase or decrease until we get to the very last couple rounds of the body portion to just taper it in a little bit before we do the hem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up right where I left off. At this point, you can certainly take out the stitch markers that were marking your rounds for the yoke. You're not going to need those anymore. And I am going to pick up right where I left off here, and I'm just going to begin to crochet straight across the front. This is going to be the first round of the body, straight across over here. And when I get to this part, again, these two stitch markers are also counting part of my body. So I'm going to include this stitch here and then continue straight across to this stitch here and begin going around and around and around. And that is what is ultimately going to split for my sleeve. So let me show you what that looks like. So I will begin this row. I will half double crochet my way across, and I will meet you at this spot and show you once again how to connect those two into a circle. Right, I have made it across the front part of my sweater there, front or back. Honestly, at this point, there's no official front or back, and there isn't until you choose what one you want it to be. I've made it over here to where I've split for my sleeve and where I'm going to continue on with the body. So I am going to take this stitch marker out of just this first one here so I can make my stitch in it. All right, so this was my last stitch for the body, and then I'm going to remember to keep the right side facing out as you connect the two sides here. You're just going straight away into that next stitch that you had connected with the stitch marker, and that connects your body, the front to the back. All right, see what that looks like. So right now you've got one little stitch that just connected those two. And your sleeve is just going to remain open here, unworked, until you come back after you're done with the rest of the body. So what you're going to do at this point is work the back side all the way back over to this split here where you began your first round of the body. All right, so I'll meet you there and we will talk about what's going to happen next. All right, here we are back again on the other side, on the other armpit, and I just made my last stitch of that round, which is the last stitch of round 1 of the body. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that. So I can begin my stitch count for the body. And remember when we split, this stitch marker was marking for the sleeves. So these two stitches are going to be included in the round for the sleeves. So I'm just going to go ahead and skip past those, okay? So I'm going to go straight into this stitch, which was the first stitch of my round for the first round of my body, all right? So as I go into that one, that is now going to connect the other armpit, or the part of the body or whatever is going to split for the sleeve and the body. So now I officially have my very first complete closed round for the body that I'm going to continue working on around and around and around for the number of rounds that is required for the pattern. And then we will come back and work on the sleeves. All right, so go ahead and act like your body is done and we're back ready to start the first sleeve. You'll rejoin your yarn at these unworked stitches. You are simply going to rejoin in that very first stitch, unworked stitch at the armpit. This is underneath, and bring in a slip stitch to rejoin there. And beginning in that exact same stitch, you will work your first half double crochet of the round for the first round of the sleeve. So into that same stitch, your first half double crochet. Go ahead and mark that. You do not want to lose track of your rounds, and they can blend in with each other as you're joining here. All right, and simply, just like we did with the body, you are going to half double crochet all the way around, as you get back to the other end, the other side of the armpit here, working that last stitch that is available. Again, this is the body right here. So you will have an unworked stitch. You will make your final stitch of the first round of the sleeve there, and you will just continue on working in the same direction with the right side facing around and around and around as you come around and rejoin and connect in with the stitch that you just worked. So when I come back, I'm going to demonstrate for you how to do the ribbing for the cuff and the hem of the sweater, both of which are done in the same way. They will look very similar to your collar, but since you're working them directly onto your sweater, the technique is a little bit different. So I will demonstrate those for you. All right, I'm just finishing my last round on the sleeves, this decrease round that brings kind of that puff shape to the sleeves, and I am going to walk you through how to do the cuff. Now the cuff on the sleeve is done in the exact same way as the cuff on the hem, which I have actually completed. I'm going to show you an example of what that looks like. This really nice, beautiful hem. All right, so let's do this together and you will be ready to go. A reminder that you're going to go down one hook size for the hem and for the cuff on the sleeve. So I was using a size 5 for the sweater, so I'm going down to a size 4.5 millimeter for the cuff. All right, so go ahead and close your final round with a slip stitch. All right, so to start the ribbing for the cuff, we're going to begin by chaining 10. And what we're going to do for this very first rib is we are going to skip that very first chain from the hook, and working in the back bumps, similar to the collar, we are going to single crochet our way back down. All right, so we are back down. Here's my final chain. Now, so there's our first little rib. And now when you get back down to the final row of either your sleeve or your hem, again, either way, you're going to be doing a slip stitch in the next 2 stitches, okay? So this was where we joined our round and we took off on our very first hem, or our very first rib. So that little stitch has been used. So we're going to slip stitch in these next 2. It's 1, and then slip stitch in the next one. All right, and then we're going to chain 1, And we're going to turn and work our way back up that little rib for our next rib. You're going to skip the 1 chain and the 2 slip stitches that you did. You're going to go straight in to the back loop only of that rib that you just made with a single crochet. All right, and you're going to go all the way up to the end. So you're going to have 9 single crochet going back up. What you're going to do, however, to make a really nice clean edge to your cuff is when you get to the very last one, that 9th one at the very tip of this little rib, you're going to do your single crochet through both loops instead of just through the back loop. You can certainly do it through the back loop if you like the look of that better, but it makes a little bit of a crisper edge. Here's my very last one right here, and I'm going to do it through both loops rather than just the back loop. I prefer how that looks. And so then the same thing on your way back down again, okay? So we've just finished that second row. We're going to chain and we're going to turn and work our way through the back loops back down again, except for that very first one, the one on the very edge of your cuff. We're going to use both loops for that first single crochet. So whenever you're at the edge, you're going to work through both loops instead of working through the back loop only. All right, so now we're back down to the last row of our sleeve. This is the stitch that we've got that last rib coming out of. So for the next 2 stitches along the edge, we're going to place slip stitches to join that back to the sleeve. So 1 slip stitch, 2 slip stitch. Okay, chain 1, turn, and again, skipping that chain and skipping those 2 slip stitches, you're going to work your way back up through the back loop only of each of these stitches until you get to the very last one, and then you're going to do your very last single crochet of this rib through both loops. And you're going to do that all the way around. And just like we did with the collar, once you get all the way back around to the beginning where you started your very first rib, you're simply going to hold them together, the first row and the last row of your rib, and slip stitch them together on the inside of your cuff. So that concludes everything that I wanted to show you on how to put together this beautiful Mt Rainier sweater. Certainly, if you have any other questions about the construction of this project or any other project that you're working on, leave those in the comments below and I will be happy to help.